Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're watching us from. Welcome to our Catholic Bible study class. This is lesson 6 of our study. The title of this lesson is How to Read Genesis chapter 1 as a Catholic. As we noted previously, a true Catholic Bible reader reads the Bible with intelligence. That is, he applies his intellect to whatever he is reading. This is because he or she is in search of the meaning and the message of the text. A true Catholic Bible reader is neither a literalist nor a fundamentalist. He or she cannot afford to read any passage of the Bible word for word like a literalist. He or she is not a fanatic who believes that every word in the Bible possesses some magical powers to accomplish great things. A Catholic Bible reader must go beyond what is written in search of the fuller meaning of the text. This is more or less a rule in Catholic Bible reading. It is called Lectio Divina, which means a prayerful and reflective reading of the text, paying attention to the voice of God from the text. It is a kind of meditative, contemplative reading of the Word of God in the sacred scriptures. As a Catholic Bible reader, you would like to begin reading your Bible from the first chapter of the first book, which is the book of Genesis. The name Genesis means the beginning. It acquired this name on two grounds. The first is the entire book talks about the beginning of all things in creation. The second is the first story of the book begins with the phrase, "in the beginning." Ancient Israel, like most of our counterparts in the ancient Near East, they titled their documents of their books with the first major word of the text or the document. The Vatican says the Roman Catholic Church has continued this tradition. Most of our documents acquire their titles from the first word, major word used in that particular text. When one opens the Bible to read the book of Genesis, you are immediately served with a long story about creation by God, who is called Elohim in Hebrew. Some Bible experts believe that the story of creation in Genesis chapter 1 drew from an ancient community in Israel that used Elohim as the name of their God. The whole story of creation in these early chapters of the book of Genesis covers the 31 verses of chapter 1 and the 3 early verses of chapter 2. The entire story of creation could be divided into two parts. The first part is made up of verses 1 to 2, and it contains the major theme of the creation story, the major message of the creation story. The second part contains an expansion of the major theme that we find in verses 1 to 2. The first part reads thus: "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was a formless void. There was darkness over the deep, and God's Spirit hovered over the water." This is taken from the Jerusalem Bible. These two verses that we meet first in the first chapter of the book of Genesis contain the summary of what God accomplished in creation. All the necessary items of creation are there. There, God is the chief actor and creator at the time of the creative action, which is the beginning. The summary of all this is that at the beginning, God created the universe, or what is being projected today as multiverse, because it's no longer conceived that we have only one universe. Some scientists are suggesting that we may even have multiple universes, which they label as multiverse. The second part of the creation story covers from verse 3 of the first chapter to verse 3 of the second chapter. That is 32 verses in total. This part of the story appears to be just like an elaboration, as I said earlier, as an expansion of the main theme of the story. This part of the creation story has some features that demonstrate the nature of the story. The first is this part of the story spreads the creative activities of God into 6 days, plus 1 day that is the Sabbath day, which is meant for God to rest. God rested on Sabbath day. As we can see, this is more or less a human way of presenting divine activities. Here, God's activities in creation are programmed to follow a scheduled day-by-day activity, which culminates on the seventh day, declared as a rest day. But we know that it is human beings who work, get tired, and take a rest. God, as a spirit, has no body as to get tired and take a rest after working for 6 days. That is to say, this is a human way of telling a divine story. As we noted earlier about how inspiration works in the life of a holy writer of the stories of the Bible, the 6-day program of creation proves it. The inspired author employed the image of human beings working and getting tired to illustrate the divine activity in creation. The presentation of the creation story in 7-week day framework is clearly the work of a human author who elaborated the creation story to support as well as to prop up the Sabbath day law. Of course, this happened after the event of Mount Sinai, where Moses gave ancient Israel the 10 Commandments that highlighted the importance of keeping the Sabbath day holy, as well as the prohibition of manual activities on the Sabbath. But we know that the events at Mount Sinai took place around 1300 BC. That is before Jesus was born. But creation as an event happened many thousands of years before the event of Sinai. So when it was being written down, they adapted the event at Mount Sinai to interpret the event of creation, which happened thousands of years before the event of Mount Sinai. That is something to ponder when reading the story of the creation in Genesis chapter 1. The second feature of the elaborated part of the creation story is it is divided into stanzas, and it has patterns. In fact, there are two patterns. The first pattern is that the story is divided into 9 stanzas. The first pattern is the introduction. God said. Then the command, let there be. Then command obeyed. It was done. God's reaction, God was pleased. And then the day of the event is announced. This pattern is reproduced in the 9 stanzas of the creation story. The second pattern is this. It is made up of 3 days of separation and 3 days of filling up or population in the creation story. It runs like this. The first day, creation of light and separation of darkness. Second day, separation of water above from water below. Third day, separation of water below from dry land. Fourth day, God fills up and populates the vault or firmament of heaven with sun, moon, and stars. Fifth day, God fills and populates the air with birds and the sea with fish. Sixth day, God fills and populates the land with animals and human beings. These are the 2 patterns that we discover in the elaborated section of the creation story. There's another feature that also we discover when reading. The next feature of this passage is contained in its treatment of some known facts in the story. 1. For the author, light is created on the first day when God separated it from darkness to establish day and night. But strangely, the sun is only created on the 4th day to separate day from night, an action which is already accomplished on the first day. For all of us living in the 21st century, we know that the light that comes to the earth is from the sun, which is created on the 4th day after the light had been created on the first day. 2. The author behind Genesis chapter 1 story believes that the sun, the moon, and the stars are all minions that serve the earth. But nothing reveals the genre or form of the Genesis chapter 1 story than this presentation of the heavenly bodies. The mindset of the author of the story is poetic. He is writing a poem. The author's thought about the heavenly bodies is similar to what children sing or recite about the stars in the popular nursery rhyme, which we call Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, how I wonder what you are, like a diamond in the skies. For this mindset, the star is small and it twinkles like a diamond. Why the poem is enjoyable? It does not reveal the truth about the stars or other heavenly bodies. As people of the 21st century, we know more of the heavenly bodies. We know that the earth is not the center of the solar system. It is a little dot in the solar system. The sun is far bigger. Other planets may be far bigger. The heavenly bodies are not exactly what the author of the story of chapter 1 of the book of Genesis is saying. But the author has the liberty to use this kind of language in expressing creation because he is a poet. Another feature in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, creation story, is that There are two major reservoirs of water when you read. There's water below on earth, the ocean, the rivers, the seas. And then it consists of another large ocean that is beyond the firmaments of heaven. Even though deep space astronomy is suggesting today that there may be a vast ocean in space, 1,000,000,000,000 times bigger than the oceans on Earth, the jury is still out whether this can be scientifically established, whether this has any basis in science. Until then, it sounds strange that in the writing of the story of creation in Genesis, there's conceived a reservoir of water beyond the firmament. So when we put all these things together, the 9-stanza narrative, the 7-weekday framework of the story of creation, the rhyme and reading in the 3 days of separation and 3 days of filling up and populating the earth, the different conception of the sun and the light, the notion that the stars, the sun, and moon are only minions that serve the earth. When we put all these things together, the reasonable conclusion is that the author is not writing modern history or scientific expose about the origin of the universe. No. Rather, he is deep into poetry. The author is writing poem. He is using the genre of poetry to tell the story of creation. The purpose of poetry, according to the dictionary, is to evoke emotions, to distill human experience, and connect individuals by offering new perspectives on life, beauty, and truth. It's a way of proclamation. The expanded narrative of the creation story is a proclamation of the wonderful things God has done in creation. How he put order into chaos, banished darkness, produced a fabulous world. This kind of imagination, this kind of thinking, reflection on what God has done using poetic form is typical of ancient people. But if we were to stop at this, we wouldn't get much. That is why we have to revert to the church that holds the dictionary of meaning of biblical words. If we stop at labeling or describing the creation story as a poetry, exalting God's work in creation, we have not accomplished much. And that is why we have to go back to the church. The church gives us a fuller meaning of the text. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church is where the church brings together its traditional thinking about biblical passages. In Catechism of the Catholic Church, numbers 279 to 327, it says, Genesis chapter 1 is a foundational, inspired narrative revealing God as the sole creator ex nihilo, out of nothing, who creates a good world with humanity as its pinnacle. The ultimate revelation that is done in the Genesis story is God created the world out of nothing and elevated man as the pinnacle of creation. After creating the world, he described it as good. That's the revelation. That's the fuller meaning of the text. And that is what the church is teaching. When you read, no matter if you read it as a poetry, if you read it as a narrative, you must arrive, if you want to get a fuller text, a fuller meaning of the text, you must arrive at this conclusion that God created the world ex nihilo, out of nothing. And he created a good world, and he placed man at the pinnacle, at the summit of his creation. The fathers of the church, who constituted the tradition of the church, also have a lot of say about this particular passage of Genesis chapter 1. St. Augustine of Hippo, who is a good representative of the tradition of the church and the fathers of the church, he has something to say. He says, Genesis chapter 1 is instantaneous creation of all things simultaneously, rather than in 6 24-hour days. He argued that God created the formless matter, and that the 6 days in the creation story represent an accommodation to human understanding or angelic apprehension of order. St. Augustine is emphasizing the fact that the story of Genesis chapter 1 is not a scientific treatise, it's not a history. It's a way to expound that God created the universe instantaneously and simultaneously, not according to day 1, day 2, day 3. No. That is an elaboration. But the ultimate meaning is that God created a wonderful world with a human being at the summit of his creation. And what God created is a wonderful world that is good. He created it with nothing. There was no pre-existent matter that God used in creating the world. Creation was out of nothing by the infinitely good God. That is the only reading that is possible from Genesis. If we read it that way, we have accomplished a good reading as good Catholic Bible readers. Every reading of Genesis chapter 1 must come back for its fullest meaning in reading the tradition of the church, the teaching of the church, and the story. And that is what is contained in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. It is also contained in the tradition of the church, represented by St. Augustine of Hippo. Thank you very much, and God bless.